This is the Defenders podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about Loki Season 2, Episode 5, Science/Fiction.
What do you want?
I want to stop He Who Remains.
No, wrong. Try again. What is it that you really want? Come on.
I want to save this. I want to save everything. All of it.
Is it really that hard? Come on, keep trying.
I want to save the TVA.
Why?
I want the TVA back.
And?
What do you want?
I want my friends back.
Welcome back, fellow Defenders, to TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about Loki Season 2, Episode 5, Science/Fiction, the penultimate episode of Loki Season 2. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Defenders. Yes, I am your other host, John.
We're both a little snotty this week.
No, you're a little snotty.
I am, yes, unfortunately. I have a little bit of a cold, which has meant we've recorded a day later than we usually do.
Yes, we will call Derek Young Snotty for the rest of the podcast.
But I am excited to talk about this episode, and very excited to talk about a little bit of news before we go into our Loki discussion, because we did get the trailer for Echo released last week. Very excited about this, actually, as the spin-off now, as we'd probably call it, from Hawkeye, where we saw Echo last time.
Yes.
Coming to Disney Plus on January 10th, 2024. All 5 episodes being released in one day under an imprint they're now calling Marvel Spotlight. It's going to be an adult show, a TVMA as they call it in the US, only available to people that subscribe to the adult version of Disney Plus, which includes Hulu.
Is there such a thing?
There is, yes. That you have to log in to an adult version, sign off that you're over 18 and able to watch the show. But
this sounds very suspicious.
It's true. It's absolutely true. But it does look much more in the vein of our original Netflix Defenders shows.
It really does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yes, and also because it literally has Vincent D'Onofrio as the Kingpin.
It does.
In there. Mm-hmm. Yes. But good stuff. No, I'm glad they're have finally made this decision to do something that is in that adult space, like the Netflix Defenders series, and some of the spin-offs like The Punisher.
Exactly.
Because there's certainly a place for them here.
Yeah, definitely. We also saw a little glimpse of Charlie Cox in his Daredevil outfit. It looked like the red suit again, not the yellow and red one that we saw in She-Hulk. And we also already talked a couple of weeks ago about the fact that Daredevil has hired one of the writers from Punisher and Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who directed loads of episodes of Loki, on board for the Daredevil Born Again series, trying to keep closer to Netflix Daredevil is the rumor. So that would fit quite well with Echo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems so far.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. One of the other things that was in the news last week as well, I just want to have a quick chat about as well, is the Verity article that came out, which has led to hundreds, if not thousands, of headlines that have appeared. Having read the article that's in Variety, it really seems like a speculation piece on the MCU and why it's failing, apparently, according to this article. Loads of the speculation has been already disproven by a number of people behind the scenes. There's rumours that things like the Blade movie was turning into a female-led movie, and that Mahershala Ali, who's playing Blade, was going to become the fourth character of the team on Blade, that he wasn't going to be the lead character in the movie. And writers that have been involved in the movie say there's never been a script that was like that. It is all leading to a Mahershala Ali-led movie. That's why he signed on to it. He's a double Oscar winner. Loads of the speculation coming out of the retreat that Kevin Feige leads every year for all of the writers of the MCU, and has always done for all of the writers from Marvel Comics, where they have an open forum where they can discuss whatever they want to, bring any ideas to the table. Nothing's a bad idea until it gets stricken through. Apparently a lot of this discussion was turned into speculation for the article, where someone had suggested at this retreat that they bring back some of the original actors who played Robert Downey Jr., for example, playing Iron Man. And apparently this writer has taken this to make it sound like Marvel, even though they've had at least $1.75 million movie this year, that they think they're failing. So yeah, I take this entire article with a grain of salt, but I really take all the articles that have taken one line from the article and written the whole article out of it with major pounds of salt. Marvel isn't failing. Marvel will have to slow down in its output, certainly, because they can't afford the level of output given that Disney Plus isn't making money, but they're not failing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm surprised at Variety, but I didn't, in the end, I just couldn't be bothered reading it because I just thought, what's the point? But I mean, at the same time, I think any studio goes through ups and downs, however relative that might be. And whether it's to do with the wider superhero genre, whether it's people, comparing it to the sort of phase 1, phase 2 sort of extravaganza and not really knowing how to place this current phase or phases that have happened since then. I think there's a whole host of reasons, to be honest. And I think at the end of the day, it's an evolution of a studio. It's probably just sensationalism, coming from Variety, and then like hyper sensationalism coming from articles that are just doing literally no reporting, just by the sounds of it, copying and pasting in order to get headlines, to get ad revenue, effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I won't deny them any ad revenue, but of course, one of the things that is a major player in this is, of course, the two strikes that have been going on, where we had the writer's strike followed by the actor's strike. So a lot of articles that would be written at the moment can't be written. So this particular article continually said, speaking to someone in the know, I've reached out for comment to people from the studio, but they haven't commented. So that's usually a sign that this is an opinion piece, unverified facts, as they would usually say in the old world of journalism. But yeah, if any of the speculation turns out to be true, it sounds like more of a threw everything at the wall, and some of it has to be true. But it seems quite unlikely that Marvel are going to change their entire plan and their entire approach to the future. Obviously, they made movies that they test with audiences and see if they work. If they're making a profit off the back of them, they may not be making the profit like $1 billion for every individual movie anymore. I'm sure they weren't expecting that. We've talked about it multiple times on here, that they were aiming for different audiences, more broad audiences, and for younger audiences, groups that haven't watched every one of the 32 movies and their 12 TV shows. So yeah, I think I just wanted to have a chat about it anyway. I just thought it was an interesting article and has been picked up by lots and lots of other people. But yeah, interesting as any kind of speculative article will be, but I wouldn't take most of what's in there as being completely truthful.
Excellent. Now that work of fiction has been dealt with, let us get on with the science/fiction, which is episode 5 of Loki season 2, the penultimate episode of this season. Which you'll be able to find over on our website at tvpodcastindustries.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast and to the Defenders feed on any mischievous or godlike podcast player of your choice.
Absolutely. We want to hear your feedback as well on Loki as a series. If you want to email us, you can email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or pop on over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries. And we're also always open to hearing your voicemails. We're coming up to the final episode of Loki, so if you want to send us in any voicemails of your thoughts of the season, you can email us with those to the same email address, or you can pop on over to our website at tvpodcastindustries.com and record your voicemail on there. You'll have up to 90 seconds to leave your feedback on there, but we'd love to hear some voicemails as we get to the last episode of Loki.
Yes, we love hearing from our fellow Defenders on all things Marvel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Derek, let us get off to a flying start with some of the episode details. Who gave us what, where, when, how, and why? Absolutely,
really easy one this time. Developed for TV, of course, by Michael Waldron. This episode, once again, written by Eric Martin, who's been the writer on the show for the entire season this season. And the episode was once again directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. Really good directors behind the scenes here, and there are some excellent scenes in this episode. There's some fantastic looking moments. So excited to get in and talk about it. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for Loki season 205, science/fiction?
Sure. In the aftermath of the destruction of the Temporal Loom, Loki is left alone in the TVA headquarters as everyone else has vanished. As he explores the building trying to locate any of his friends, he begins time-slipping again when he meets a later version of himself as the TVA headquarters, now with a failsafe initiated by a rudimentary Miss Minutes, begins to break down and spaghettify around him. Loki escapes as he time-slips to numerous branch timelines at different times, where one by one he meets his former friends, Casey, Hunter B-15, Mobius and O.B., who have been reset to their original lives as Frank Morris, Dr. Verity Willis, Don, and Dr. A.D. Doug, respectively. But none of them have any knowledge of the TVA, nor any recollection of Loki. But Dr. A.D. Doug, aka O.B., does believe his story and is willing to help Loki time-slip to the TVA before the explosion to try and prevent the catastrophic events from happening. But Loki is unable to control his time-slipping. Doug proposes Loki gather everyone present at the time of the explosion back together. He theorizes that their collective temporal aura may hold the key to sending them back to the right time and place. Doug builds a rudimentary tempad using a TVA guidebook that Loki has kept. Loki succeeds in gathering everyone else to Doug's workshop except Sylvie, who has retained her memories. At a bar over a couple of bourbons, Sylvie refuses to help Loki as she wants to live her own life, and she gets Loki to admit his true motivation. He wants his friends back and fears being alone. Sylvie leaves the bar, heading to her local record shop, as Loki heads back to inform Doug, Don, Frank, and Verity that they are no longer needed. But when everything in Sylvie's timeline begins to spaghettify, she goes to help Loki. But no sooner there, Doug's workshop also spaghettifies as the branch timelines begin to die, as do Frank, Doug, Don, Dr. Willis, and Sylvie. As Sylvie disappears, Loki finally controls his time-slipping, returning to the point just as she arrived to Doug's workshop. Declaring that he can rewrite the story, Loki focuses on what he really wants, and time-slips back to the TVA headquarters at the point just before Victor Timely disappeared.
It's a very complicated episode, this one. There's a lot going on, lots of traveling through time, slipping through time, moving through different groups, seeing other people, having new names for all of our characters. But yeah, I think you nailed it right there, though, John. Well done.
Yeah, I think I did, just about. And I had to try and conjure up a lot of enthusiasm to do that as well. Because I have to say, at this moment in time and place of Loki Season 2, I did not expect such an exposition-heavy episode, and I found this really tough. In some ways, you know, I would just say this was not the kind of penultimate episode that I thought I ever wanted.
Right.
To suddenly have to go back into reasoning and exposition and all of that. I didn't have any problem as such with the episode. In fact, I thought some of the scenes in here were just absolutely phenomenal, and I loved it. But, you know, spoiler alert, I think I just felt slightly wearisome of the exposition having to be done again to explain now with the time slipping and effectively, you know, turning Loki, god of mischief, into a dictionary and thesaurus combination. Like, just have an exposition loom, I guess, is what he seems to be becoming. And yeah, I just found it difficult to really get into this episode. Nothing as such wrong with it, but yeah, I just found it really tough. In fact, the second time I watched it, I did actually prefer it better than when I first watched it. But I kind of was slightly angry after watching it the first time.
Really?
I just was like, this whole season feels like it's going nowhere fast. Yeah. Literally on a time loop. And I kind of wanted it to accelerate into the story rather than having to come back and explain timelines, points in time, the mechanisms for getting to and from that, like we've had all season.
I know what you mean, and one of the things that is probably frustrating about this episode when you're watching it through the first time is you're trying to follow the storyline of how Loki's going to get everybody out of this, how he's going to pick them all up and bring them back to where they're supposed to be and get them all back into the TVA, which is what he's trying to do at the beginning of the episode. And much like that presentation by Victor Timely back in the 1800s, much like that presentation, it actually turns out that none of that matters. There's a completely different approach that Loki has to take, which he only learns at the end of the episode. And you wonder if at the opening of the series, the first episode had spread all of the friends of Loki across the timeline. And for the next couple of episodes, he went and explored their timelines and learned who they are on the real sacred timeline. Maybe that was the story for the season, but crushing it all into this episode, you don't get any time with any of these characters on their sacred timeline. You get a story of them on this branched universe, and it's so small, it seems to completely cram out the episode full of what turns out to be unnecessary information by the end of the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. It feels like I don't need to know anything about the other 4 episodes almost, other than really small nuggets from it. And I just feel it's been so exposition heavy. It's been to the detriment of the characterization and, yeah, those connections that Loki has. I think, you know, more of that previously, and this getting the friends back together, like the main person you really feel that with is ultimately with Mobius. And that's where it really connects. I mean, even B15, you don't necessarily think of a deep friendship with her and Loki. And equally the same with Casey. Yes, they're colleagues or they've been involved, but it's with Mobius where you feel there is that connection, probably with Sylvie as well. And
definitely with Sylvie
and
Mobius,
Sylvie, and Sylvie hasn't been in it enough. I don't know. I feel like, yes, it's a bit of exposition over actually the story, really. In order just simply to make the story work, they've had to talk about time, the mechanics of time,
absolutely,
but very specific around the TVA, temporal looms, you know, you name it. And it's like, they had to do that in the first season, and they've had to do it again. And it's now like the reset on the 5th episode, the penultimate episode before the finale.
Yeah.
And if it's just to provide explanation for a movie, then they really should do something better.
Well, I will say we've still got 1 episode left of the season. I'm a lot higher on this episode than you are, John. I enjoyed it a lot more than you. I know you're a little bit down on this episode, like I was on one of the episodes earlier on in the season.
And I don't like being, you know, we are in our podcast, we always like to focus on the positives. We know how difficult it is to make the show. And I mean, some of the scenes in this episode are absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely,
so, you know, I feel feeling a bit down, or being a bit down on this episode, but certainly improved watching it through again.
Yeah.
And as I say, I think there's some really great standout moments in this episode.
Yeah. And I think, you know, by the end of the episode, Loki hasn't saved everything. He's put himself in a position for the final episode. So we'll see how that plays out next week when we get to the final episode of Loki. But let's get into our top variants for this episode. We're going to go through our major moments, the things we want to talk about the episode, hopefully covering everything of interest in there. Start off with variant 1, which is the other lives of the members of the TVA. The episode opens, and we kind of weirdly almost predicted this last week. We saw the explosion after Victor Timely has spaghettified outside. We saw the explosion coming towards the building where everybody's inside, and we kind of predicted, oh, hang on a second, maybe they don't all die because of the explosion. It turns out that everybody else is sent out onto the timelines, and Loki's left there on his own at the TVA. Which is similar to what we said last week, but it's not because of magic. It's not because of anything else. He's left there behind as everybody else is spread out on the TVA. So we have I thought some really fun moments, or really interesting moments, seeing him walk around this empty TVA. It felt like going back a little bit to COVID filming, as Loki's walking around all on his own throughout all the levels of this place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I did like the moment of Loki coming across himself, saying hello, time slipping a number of times, and coming back where it's him who's at the console. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I like the feel of that scene. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. And it's used later on as well. That's the reason why he realizes he's able to move throughout time within a place that has no time, like the TVA. He's able to see that he jumped forward in time to meet himself.
Exactly.
From the past,
yeah.
sort of. Yes.
So I really like that scene. But
I definitely also have to call out, we mentioned it earlier on in the season, through the time slips, the Loki hair flips are back in full form this episode. Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, where he time slips to Don's jet ski or skidoo shop, I do like that he replicates the flailing inflatable arm man behind him, as well as a flip of the hair as well. So absolutely. I thought that was good fun.
I felt that was a Tom Hiddleston improv there. He went, "Ooh,
yeah,
put the flailing arm man thing behind me. I'll go along with that, and you guys can cut it together."
But the important thing here is, as you say, everyone has been transferred to their timelines. I think, Sylvie describes it as a reset with no knowledge of the TVA, let alone knowing Loki.
Yes.
So you have these moments initially where he is time slipping directly to a point where he is meeting Casey, Mobius, B-15 and O.B. But they have no recollection of him. And so it all feels very futile in terms of this time slipping.
Yeah.
But some good moments, with Casey here being Frank, who is escaping from Alcatraz, which is a nice touch.
Absolutely. In 1962, I was going to save this for notes later on, but this is true. There was a Frank Morris who was an escapee from Alcatraz in 1962. He got a boat, he had his plan, he left the island with two brothers who were also in Alcatraz, and he was never found again. He was never caught. So he either survived and got away, or he drowned, or I guess Loki took him out of the timeline.
Well, maybe, and he became Casey at the TVA.
Just like the D.B. Cooper moment from season 1, where Loki was the guy that jumped out of the plane and disappeared after stealing loads of the money. So this is a possible true story about someone that disappeared from the timeline. So
that's
I like that.
Yeah, and I mean, also the other side of this is Loki is time slipping here without knowing how he's traveling to the exact locations where he is going to bump into his TVA team members and where they are. So that's another interesting aspect here, as we see him very briefly time slipping to where B-15 is as a pediatrician called Dr. Verity Willis.
Yep.
As she witnesses him both time slipping in and then away from her just along the corridor.
Yeah, seems very happy as a pediatrician as well. Yeah, but definitely enjoying her job. We see him slip into where Mobius is as a skidoo salesman, which loads of people had speculated as he had the magazine that he was reading in season 1. That's they speculated that he was, but it's interesting that he's not the owner of the place or anything like that. He's a salesman and seems to be a bit down on his luck. Nobody seems to be wanting to buy his mode of transport. He's trying to sell them to everybody, but nobody seems to want one, even though he absolutely loves it. So a fun little moment there where we see him pretending that he's on the ocean when it's actually just in front of a camera. That was a lot of fun.
And he's there in 2022. Dr. Willis, or B-15, is there in 2012, and the fourth member here that he time slips to is O.B. as A.D. Doug, Dr. A.D. Doug, in 1994.
Yes, as a failing science fiction author, but he is a scientist who hates his job.
He's a physicist who would prefer to be writing science fiction. He's there buying his own book. I quite like that. The Zartan Contingent, which is also in the end credits as well. So I just wonder if there's something in the Zartan Contingent, because of all the four here, whilst he has no recollection of the TVA, he doesn't know Loki. He absolutely believes what Loki explains to him as to what happened, and is willing to believe him, and so they team up to learn about his time slipping.
Absolutely.
That it's not random, but it's evolving as well, is what Doug seems to say, is that it's evolving too as he's slipping around both time but also space. So, because there is that one brief moment with Loki time slipping into, is it Time Theatre 5 at the TVA?
Yeah, where he was held in the first episode of season 1. So he's able to slip into the TVA, not just around all the timelines, around these the branched timelines, to meet all of these his friends in their new roles. An interesting line from O.B. as Dr. A.D. Doug after Loki's telling the story, and he's saying, "Of course I believe you. You're one of my characters from my book come to life." He specifically says that. Some people have paused it on the post-it notes that are on the board that A.D. Doug has behind him for notes for his science fiction novels, and there's a couple of references that could mean that this entire story is written by the science fiction author A.D. Doug. Just to mess with your head a little bit more. That this whole thing is actually all in the mind of O.B. It's not actually Loki's story. This is all taking place within a novel written by A.D. Doug. So I think that might be just the production department messing around, having a bit of fun.
I think so.
With the Easter egg hunters out there. But also, potentially, some of the ideas might have been coming from the experiences that O.B. had at the TVA, and they're bleeding into the mind of A.D. Doug, potentially.
If it were to be that case, then not only do we have the multiverse, the temporal loom, and all the timelines within each universe, we would then be dealing with the metaverse.
We would be, yes.
I think that would make the MCU, according to the Variety article, literally implode. Because all their films could ever be would be exposition.
Well,
on the base of this one. So, yes, I think they're just playing around, having a little, just a few references and having that. But it is ultimately that Dr. A.D. Doug does believe what he's saying.
Absolutely.
As he says to the lady at the checkout when he's trying to buy the book that actually isn't on the shelf in the bookshop, science fiction is a valid form of fictional writing and art form.
Yeah.
And it is. I totally agree with him.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's move on to variant 2, because we'll talk a bit more about science or fiction in this one. Loki's time slipping, again, we've mentioned it a few times there, but it's the fact that he realizes that he's able to travel back into the TVA, which is impossible, and is able to travel in time within the TVA, also impossible. That's what sparks the thought in the mind of O.B. or A.D. And O.B. latches on to this idea that it could potentially be either a science problem, which is the what or how is he able to do it? What can he do to do it again? Or it could be a fiction problem. Why is he doing it? Why is he able to travel? Why is he connecting to each of the friends that he met within the TVA? How is he able to travel to them, and why is he traveling to them specifically for the period of time he's traveling?
And he believes that Loki should be able to ultimately control it.
Yeah, because the big difference that we see in this episode versus how we saw Loki's time slipping in episode 1, we saw Loki just disappearing every couple of seconds. He'd appear for a few seconds, disappear, appear somewhere else, and then disappear.
But he would reappear in the same spot, just at a different time.
Yes, exactly. Whereas here, we're seeing him move across, have full conversations with people, and when those conversations are finished, he's almost slipping out. So it does feel much more like Loki's in control of this. While he doesn't understand how, he has a full conversation with Casey as he appears in 1962 around Alcatraz, and it's only at the point when Casey is telling him, you need to find your own way out of here, I don't know who you are, that then Loki slips out and goes and sees the next person that he needs to meet up with. And then he stops himself again from slipping when he's with Mobius and wants to talk to him and find out who he is. He spends time with him. So that's quite interesting. And that idea sparks with AD that he suggests he get everyone back together in the one place, that those 5 people, if they're all together, they'll be able to find a way back to that specific point in the TVA where Loki's trying to get back to.
The other thing as well that O.B. or A.D. Doug postulates here is that Loki is in fact acting like a biological tempad here. And so Loki asks AD Doug to make a tempad from the TVA guidelines and manual that ultimately gives AD Doug huge amounts of pleasure because it's a bestseller. And because as he sees that he has, the lookalike has written it, you know, he has written a piece of science.
Yes, that's a bestseller. Yeah, I like the kind of joke in that, you know.
Yeah.
Do you call a textbook that's given out to everybody that works for a company a bestseller if every single person has one on the desk? You know, it's not the same as...
If you get paid for it,
if you get paid for it, yeah, maybe he's gotten paid for every single copy of that. We do also hear a little nod in the background to O.B. and his obsession with building the tempad from the book, that it's actually taken him 18 months the next time he meets up with Loki, and he's lost his house and his wife. He lost those completely. He didn't lose them from being a fiction writer. He lost them from trying to create the tempad from the TVA handbook. But I presume he probably wasn't on great terms with them since he was doing all his writing in that warehouse.
Well, that's it. Exactly. And I mean, it is that rudimentary tempad that he creates that to some extent at least provides that moment where Loki is able to hook Mobius here, because we have AD Doug coming through with his massive, you know, tempad, which I liked. I liked the fact that it was just big, you know.
Absolutely. It's like a vinyl record player versus an MP3 player.
Because, you know, Mobius is still quite skeptical here, whereas Loki is trying to convince him to come and save the TVA, to convince him that he's in fact Mobius and not Don.
Yeah.
I like that a bit later on, back in AD Doug's workshop, he says, Mobius, it's my space name. I kind of quite like that little reference.
Absolutely. And he does say the name's really cool. And Mobius's full name is Mobius M. Mobius. So it does sound like a name made up by somebody who likes cool names.
Definitely, definitely. And they use the tempad with Mobius, so he goes back and can see the initial conversation being had by Loki, trying to sort of bring him along with the others back together, to put the band back together, to create this temporal aura that Doug is trying to postulate will provide that specific location and time that Loki needs to get back to.
Exactly.
As I say, exposition.
Yes, it is. It is. And I suppose there's a couple of things that are in here that I think would be interesting to have been explored here, or I thought they were going this way. The idea that we know that Casey, Mobius, B-15 and O.B. were all taken from a timeline and brought to the TVA, have had their memories wiped a few times as well. That idea in itself made me wonder whether, is it Loki that has set up the TVA in the first place? Everybody said it was Victor Timely, that he'd written the book, but we met Victor Timely. He meets O.B. for the first time. There's that whole idea that the two of them have kind of cogged off each other to create the TVA. And now here we have Loki going around gathering all these people together who did have lives on the timeline. And I was wondering for the whole episode, is this actually how they got to the TVA in the first place? That Loki plucked them from their timelines, convinced them all of where they needed to go to, and then wiped their minds. It didn't play out that way in the episode, though.
No, but I also, you know, it is the point of, like, why is he doing this? And, you know, he's very committed now to the TVA, and I just wonder if it's still, you know, with that final revelation that we'll come to in our final variant, with Loki being able to control his time slipping, and he is also a god. Gods are quite good at creation, that he has created this story, by being so slipping in and out of it across multiple spaces and times, and that has resulted in this.
It all weaving together. Yeah.
So I still think that's a possibility, for sure. Yeah.
So we'll probably see that in the next episode. One other character we haven't really mentioned at all is Sylvie. We'll talk about her in our variant 3. Sylvie won't help until her vinyl store spaghettifies. I do think it's quite interesting that we have Sylvie here, who knows exactly what happened. She was there, standing there, right beside everybody else. She knows absolutely that everybody else has been sent back to their own branch timelines. She knows who Loki is instantly as he arrives. She sees him slipping and then is like, get in the car, we're going for a drink.
Yeah, I love that. He goes, this isn't playing out how I thought it would, really liked it. I loved this because I think this was the first sort of indication with seeing her McDonald's spaghettify away, as she comes out of McDonald's before Loki
her takeaway
tempads in. You see her takeout McDonald's disappears.
Can you imagine if McDonald's turned into a lovely spaghetti bolognese? How much better would that be?
Well, no, they would ruin that as well.
They probably would, yeah.
So I think, and you're going, okay, so everything isn't perfect. Apart from the spaghettifying of the TVA earlier in the episode, you just see those threads of the McDonald's takeout going. You see it later with Loki going for his shot of bourbon after him and Sylvia had their conversation and it not being there. And he's wondering where that's gone.
Yeah, it's very like the dusting that we saw in the Avengers Infinity War as everybody started to just disappear, or things started to disappear behind people, or people started to disappear behind other characters, Absolutely. This idea that they aren't noticing because it's just small things like Sylvie's McDonald's or the bourbon that are disappearing.
It's just more Italian.
Yeah.
Because it's spaghetti.
Exactly.
And I think, that's when you really get the sense of some of the threat here as to what's happened, because in a sense, B-15, Mobius, O.B, Casey, they've all just gone back onto their timelines. And it's because, as Sylvie says, they're back in their real lives, which is a good thing. They never had the choice to be plucked and have their memories wiped, to be part of the TVA. You've got this back and forth between Loki and Sylvie, around that. But, all those other timelines, you didn't get the sense of the threat by just these little small bits of the spaghettifying going on. And I like that it plays in here because I think it adds something to Loki and Sylvie's chat at the bar where, she's like, I want a life. I'm selfish. As I said, their lives, their real lives are a good thing. Whereas Loki goes, but their lives matter to this endeavor of saving the TVA. And it's like, why do you, it's ultimately the big question. She's asking him, why? Why do you want the TVA saved? What is the skin in the game here? As, he's trying to convince Sylvie to help. And, it comes down to like the opening snippet that we have on the podcast, because ultimately, he wants his friends back, so he's not alone.
Yeah. I do love the joke in there that she keeps pushing him with questions of why, and then the bartender basically comes up, asks him what he wants. What is it that he wants? And Loki answers him with, I want my friends back. So,
exactly.
Yeah, I thought that was quite funny. Little gag.
It's like, as she says, it's now time for Loki to write his own story of what he's going to do, but it's assuming that all these branch timelines are stable. And as we see, the little hints that they're not, from, the Maccas as well as the bourbon. Yeah. So I kind of really enjoyed this. And then that scene in the record shop, I just loved. For me, this was the best, part of this episode.
Without a doubt.
I thought just the camera movement going from above, Sylvie tilting back along the length of the record shop as you see another customer about to walk in, spaghettifying, the music there from Velvet Underground.
Great tune.
It was just really
Oh Sweet
good.
Nothing from 1970s album Loaded, if you want to check it out. It's a really good song, really good album as well.
Song.
But yeah, I love the next customer disappearing after the doorbells rang. The owner of the shop looks over to find her as he starts to pour coffee into his mug, which has disappeared, and then his coffee starts to spaghettify, and then the whole front of the store starts to go, the window behind him, and he runs out of the spaghettification to wake up Sylvie from the song that she's listening to try and warn her that something's coming here. And as he spaghettifies himself, just that beautiful moment as they're looking down at the vinyl record, everything in the room starting to dissolve around Sylvie, and then it's starting to go circular, just like the vinyl record, which is the last thing to go before Sylvie steps back, takes the tempad that she has from He Who Remains and uses it to go and find Loki. So I thought it was absolutely beautifully done.
Definitely. I thought the spaghettification of the glass was really, really like cool. Along with the record, as it looks like one of those grim licorice swirls.
I love licorice.
I know you do, but I don't. And then there's that moment where the little table lamp spaghettifies and you just get the flickering of the light going off, which was really good. And as you say, just the reach of the shop owner towards Sylvie as she turns round to see him spaghettifying. And again, like you say, just like the dusting moment, but more Italian.
Yeah.
Ultimately. So this scene I absolutely thought was fantastic.
Yeah.
As you can probably tell, from the excitement in my voice, I just thought it was so well constructed, really well shot.
Yeah.
The vibe from the music, the special effects, the computer generated effects, just really spot on. Looked really cool.
Yeah, beautifully told. Really enjoyed this. But yes, that is Sylvie. Effectively, her branch timeline is now gone, and she's jumping towards Loki.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately where she realizes that yes, the branch timelines are decaying, are being destroyed. That no one is fine unless there is the TVA to maintain this as these branches are dying.
Exactly.
That's her realization. And so ultimately, despite the bar scene, which I really enjoyed, she gets to Doug's workshop.
Exactly, which is our fourth and final variant. Loki actually needs to find his why.
Yes.
So he has learned his why from that conversation with Sylvie. He's back here with the group. He comes back really dejected from that discussion with Sylvie, though, when she says she's not going to appear back. So that plan that came from O.B, that he needs everybody back in the room together, and then he can find his way to that point in the TVA. He's not able to do it, so he tries to send them all away.
Yes.
Until Sylvie comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. That's why his why is he wants his friends.
Yeah, and I suppose there's just one little extra touch to Mobius' story that adds a little bit of, I suppose, an undercurrent of why he's so willing to help Loki here. You mentioned it earlier on, John. Mobius is plucked from 2022, and he says he's a single father. His wife is gone. 2022 was right in the middle of the blip, so his wife may have been dusted.
Yes.
And if he's hearing that he could possibly prevent something similar from happening, then of course he's going to take his opportunity to go out here. But he absolutely doesn't want to leave his kids behind. Loki has promised him that he will be put back on the timeline exactly from the point that where he's left. But his children are in danger. His world is in danger if he doesn't come and help them now.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So I wonder if that kind of plays a little bit into Don's character, that he lost his wife in the blip and doesn't want that to happen to his kids. That might be what
absolutely.
It is.
And I think that, again, it's another real kind of, good emotional moment here as Doug's workshop begins to spaghettify as well. I like the fact that the tempad has gone and they think it's Frank who's pinched it. Because we hear him talking with Doug earlier saying, well, can we, travel to a park or to Mount Rushmore? or inside a vault.
A bank vault, yes.
Yeah, this was really good.
Yeah. I like that Loki's just going to go, you could rob however many banks you want to after we've done this job, but we need the temp pad right now.
But I just thought this was really, again, I think Mobius at the heart, but seeing B-15 as well, the shock on her face as they all start to spaghettify, but Mobius is wanting to get back to his kids.
Yeah.
But spaghettifies before he can go anywhere. So I thought this was really good. And in that moment, Loki is there seeing all his friends spaghettifying. Yeah.
And it's even O.B. going, I guess it wasn't a science problem. I guess it was a fiction problem because all 5 people are in the room together and it hasn't worked. So,
but as Sylvie goes, as the last one of them goes, Sylvie, he screams and reverses it back to Sylvie. It's a knee-jerk reaction that has the effect because he's not had to actually think about it. And brings Sylvie back to where she's just come back through the door after her record shop and timeline has spaghettified. I'm going to need an Italian after this podcast. I think, spag bol is in order after this.
Excellent. That'd be great. We should never record the podcast just before dinner, John. I'm always hungry when we do that. But it is a really interesting moment. And again, we don't get a huge amount of exposition here. Loki just says he knows what to do now. He knows how to rewrite the story effectively. And then we see him appearing behind O.B., back at the TVA, just at the point that Victor Timely has walked out, or is walking down to put on his suit and walk out to the temporal loom.
And as he says to Doug, it's not about the where, when, or why, it's about the who. So we'll see. Is that referring to him? I think initially I thought that was it, that he was referring to himself in that, and that's why I thought he could still be the creator of the TVA.
Yeah.
Or is it with Victor Timely? Or someone else?
Or with O.B.
So, really interesting.
It is. It is.
So I like the end. I like where we got to with this, but maybe the journey was a little bit too much for me.
Yeah, it's a lot. It is a lot. And as I say, unless some of these elements pay off differently in the last episode than we're expecting, it seems like a lot of work for storylines that may not go anywhere. So it'll be interesting to see in the next episode. I was waiting around for a post-credit scene in this episode.
Absolutely. But actually, the previously on part, again, gives a clue because whilst there's no post-credit scene, and whilst I'm there saying, well, it's, is it the who? Is it actually Loki? We still have the assertion, and I think this is the underlying thing through this, that we have He Who Remains repeating what he said to Loki and Sylvie. I paved the road for you to get here. So even if it is Loki that created the TVA, again, it's all about destiny, predestination, being orchestrated by He Who Remains. And we still get that assertion right up top
in the previously on,
the previously on part. So,
just remember, He Who Remains could still be behind all of this. None of this negates the possibility that he had seen all this happen, and this was his plan all along. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah.
So it's not so much possibly that Loki creates the TVA, but he creates He Who Remains ultimately.
Potentially, yeah. We will see as we get into next week's finale episode. I did say there's no post-credit scene, but there is a slight post-credit scene. Right at the end of the music, you hear the voice of X5, Brad, saying the line, "You died, insert your coin, loser," presumably from that Zaniac game that we saw on the timeline with Sylvie. So that is a possibility that Brad, who we saw get wiped from the timeline last episode, that potentially he's back on his own branch timeline. He went back and made Zaniac, Zaniac 2, Zaniac 3, and then the Zaniac video game. So it's just a possibility. He's not one of the friends of Loki, so he didn't feature in this episode, but it's possible that that everybody that was crushed in that box in the TVA went back to their own branch timelines after being crushed or being wiped from existence as they were.
Yeah, definitely.
In there. Or else they just took a sample from the movie Zaniac and used it in the game. which is also possible.
But
true. It's an interesting nod just right at the end, given that there was no post-credit scene. But that's it for our points. Any other notes? Anything else you wanted to call out for the episode, John, at all?
No, nothing from me, old snotty.
The only other thing, just because I called out about Don Mobius being in 2022, also kind of interesting that the Doctor, B-15, Dr. Verity Willis, is in 2012, which was the year of the attack on New York. So Loki could have been right around the corner there. She's in New York as well. So Loki could have been right around the corner there, leading the hordes in the attack against the Avengers in 2012.
That is true, yeah.
So I just thought that was interesting, her placement in New York in 2012. So there you go. Maybe we'll find out more about that in next week's episode, or maybe they'll ignore it completely.
I think they'll ignore it completely.
You never know. It's odd that they would reference those two specific dates in this episode, given that Loki had a big part to play in the attack on New York, and that he was one of the first people to go before the blip, right? In Thanos' attack.
Yeah. But what happened in 1962 then? Is that when Stan Lee was born?
I don't think so.
Got his first job
definitely.
in Marvel?
In fact, definitely not, because he was around in the time of Timely Comics in the 50s. So yeah, no, that's definitely not.
Got his Marvel gig?
I wonder whether it was something to do with the creation of the Fantastic Four in comics. I think that was around 62 or 64. So maybe that was it. But the real reason for 1962 is because Frank Morris is a real person, and that was when he escaped from Alcatraz.
Okay.
Yes, there you go. John, one last thing to do. I don't know whether to ask this, but I will anyway. Do you defend Loki Season 2, Episode 5, Science/Fiction?
I do just about defend this episode of Loki. I'd give it 3 spag balls out of 5. I found this a slog, it for sure. I felt like I was a hamster on a wheel getting back into exposition heavy, and dialogue to understand how, why, were, what, who, Loki can do about his time slipping and the different weaves of the loom and so on around the temporal loom, and it all just felt like more exposition. So I found this massively exposition heavy. Okay, done in a different way through, the moniker of science/fiction as to investigating the what and then the why, and it ultimately becoming, the who. So I dug it in a sense. I AD dug it. But yeah, I guess I've just a bit exasperated with the amount of exposition. I think there's been a lot of it, and probably too much of it, trying to explain things that ultimately are red herrings. Whereas I think if you'd had this exploration of his friends, B-15, O.B., Mobius, and Casey through the course of this season, maybe, it would smack an emotional punch. Because I do think we got a bit of that, particularly with Mobius, and with Sylvie, and more so with Sylvie at the bar. I just thought that was, from that point on, I was like, that was just really good. That to me set the scene for what happens at the end with Doug's workshop and him realizing that he can, influence this story. How that is going to be, we'll see next episode. But I really enjoyed the stuff back in Sylvie's timeline at the bar and their conversation. In some ways, it's because I wanted more of that. I mean, I know we've had some feedback from our fellow defenders previously talking about, Sylvie just seems so peripheral. Yeah. And here it felt
as she wants to be, but yes.
Yeah, she wants to be, but it's not her story.
Yes.
And I felt, it was just a really good bit of dialogue between her and Sylvie, and then the record shop. I just loved that bit. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think there's some good bits in this. But I just felt it was a slog at the wrong time, in the wrong place for this series. And so do defend it, but it's 3 spag balls out of 5. Yeah.
Only 3,
Yeah.
John. Yeah. I guess
Still defend it.
Yeah, it's a low rating for the episode. And again, maybe it'll build up next episode. But I kind of get it. Like, you know, for my defend, yes, I do defend this episode. I think it's better than some of the episodes earlier on this season, certainly. But I do think one of the things that's interesting about it for me is I think this is Marvel challenging their audience a bit more. You know, there are simpler versions of this story. Realistically, this entire 2 seasons, what it's been about is Loki himself learning and changing, learning that he does need people around him, learning that he acts out more often when he's lonely, when he doesn't have people to support him. So that's the basic story, the basic framework. And hanging on to that is this idea of the time variance authority, everything that's happening with the traveling through time. And I do think this episode is quite challenging, but I feel like they're going, well, if you stuck around for 4 episodes of all of this time stuff, we're going to need to explain a few things for you before we get to the finale. So for me, I think it was done quite well, and I think it was beautifully put on film, especially as you mentioned already, Sylvie's timeline failing, the little moments of things disappearing out of people's timelines before they disappear, before everybody disappeared. But there's also some just odd things that are in there. As I said, that the idea that Mobius is in 2022, the idea that Dr. Verity Willis is in New York in 2012, the look of A.D. Doug's location, it looks really like where O.B. was working in the TVA. All those nods that you're kind of going, is there something here that I'm just not seeing, and it will all just be built together in the final episode? Will we have a moment where Loki is surrounded in all the voices, all the things that have been said in these last couple of episodes, and this experience across all the timelines all merged together, and that's where the TVA came from? Is it something like that we see it through his mind as he's filtering it all together in a final episode? Potentially that's how a lot of these things that haven't been fully explored in this episode could be explored even more in the last episode, explaining how the snake does eat its own tail and everything has no beginning and no end. That's also a possibility. So I am excited to see how it comes out next week. This isn't the greatest series of the Marvel series for me. I said it earlier on in the season. I expected to like the show a lot more than I do like it, but I do think this episode had some really interesting ideas and brought some beautiful storytelling in there, particularly with how everything disappears, similar to the blip and similar to the dusting that we saw. I think that's quite interesting visually to see. Yeah,
absolutely. I guess it is the reason why you have movies and you have TV.
Okay.
If they've taken us on a 12-hour time extravaganza, 2.5-hour movie would also have provided a shorthand for that.
It can. I'm not one of those people, though. I do like to spend time with my characters that I enjoy. I'm always one of those people that enjoys it as long as you are justifying the reasons that they're there and you're spending time with them, they're learning their lessons. I don't think Loki could have learned the lesson that he's learned here over the course of a 2.5-hour movie. It'd be much more condensed. You'd lose a lot of characterization, but they certainly could have spent more time with those characters, the friends of Loki, as we're calling them in this episode. He certainly could have spent more time with them, learning who they are. And I think in the first episode of season 2, he was looking at Casey going, your name is Casey, isn't it? Whereas now it's a best friend of his that he has to bring back into the TVA. So could have spent more time with the characters, setting up that these are the best friends that he wants to surround himself with. But I get it. Technically, you could tell every story over a very short period of time. But hopefully it justifies itself next week with the final episode of season 2 of Loki. That's it for our discussion of Loki, season 2, episode 5. We do have some feedback on the episode from our wonderful fellow defenders. First up, we have an email in from Coffee and Vodka, who says, greetings, fellow re-editing defenders. Okay, so my grasp as to how timelines work is back out of the window. Still a good and necessary transitionary episode with substance. Loki doesn't just need the band back together, he needs the band. Just like his brother, he's coming back different. And with his mastery of time slipping, he's become a double god. The rest is just achieving the possibly impossible. Frank's backstory was funny and surprising, and it's easy to see how Mobius found the TVA to be his new home sweet home. Finally, were there to be a tavern quiz for Loki this episode, the question would have been a no-brainer. What is Mobius's real name? For Lonely Lokis, Abandoned Ouroboroses, and Tiny Shots out of 5. Peace and take care, Coffee and Vodka. Would that have been the question? Is it because his name's Don, just like me, John? I'm Derek O'Neill. Don.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You are the Don.
Don of this podcast. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I guess so, yeah. I'm trying to think. How many spaghetti threads do you see?
Wow, yeah, that would have been a lot. Probably in the millions.
No, but in all seriousness, yes, I probably a question along that line. What were the alternate names? Probably for the whole gang, you know?
I think there would be two options. Either it would be name the two books that O.B has written under the guise of A.D. Doug, or if the bourbon had a name in the episode, it would absolutely be what bourbon were they drinking at the bar.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, well, interestingly on the bourbon thing, because Sylvie asks the bartender for 2 bourbons.
Yes, she
and
does.
he goes, nice choice, rather than a brand of bourbon.
Maybe it's just that timeline only has one brand. It's just all McDonald's.
Yeah, maybe.
So it's McDonald's bourbon. Maybe that's what it is.
Or the fact that it wasn't Irish whiskey or Scotch that was being requested.
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't know.
Absolutely. That's really good. Thanks so much, Coffee and Vodka.
Yeah.
Seems you're a little bit more up on the episode as well. 4 out of 5 for you for the episode. But yeah, it does feel like a transitionary episode. A lot of this hopefully necessary next week. But yeah, another very powerful character. We saw in Secret Invasion how powerful one of the characters gets in there by the finale. And here we have God Loki able to travel anywhere in any time that he chooses to, it seems. So that's a pretty powerful character.
Absolutely. And good stuff, Coffee and Vodka. I'm glad that you enjoyed it for sure. And but a bit like you know, I was like, okay, how the timelines work is back out the window, and it felt slightly to me like revising for an exam, only to find out I'd revised for the wrong exam. And so it was like, oh, there's a lot of energy in this to deal with it. As I say, I still defended it.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks, Coffee and Vodka.
Yep. Thanks, Coffee and Vodka.
Over on our Facebook group, we have some feedback. First up, it's Lindsay Lawes, who says, this is my fave episode of the season. The first few episodes didn't land for me as much. In fact, I was confused at what was happening. I must confess, I'm not up to date with the films though, so I get the sense that had impacted my ability to fully appreciate it. That said, even with my confusion, I do still enjoy the show. The cinematography has been great, and so are the performances. I love this episode most because it gave me one of the things I really wanted to see, the others' past lives. I also enjoyed that this episode explored Loki inevitably uncovering and admitting to himself that what he sought for was his friends and their companionship more than anything else. It's a cliche, but really good and effective for Loki, who would usually operate on his own. I'm very eager to see how he and his merry band of misfit variants will solve this thing with the loom. Thanks so much, Lindsay, for your feedback. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, you know, that yes, it is a cliche, but for Loki, it really makes sense. You know, he is the one-man show, has always been. He's always had that arrogance, and he has, over these trials and tribulations, found this companionship. A bit as to the point from Coffee and Vodka, you know, he's come back different, like his brother Thor did, you know? Yeah. So I think really good. I totally agree with you around the cinematography and the performances as well. I also agree around the cinematography and the performances. Really, really good. I think, seeing the others' past lives, just those little glimpses was a little bit of a treat as well. Even if with some we only got a little bit compared to the others. But I think for me that coupled with Loki and Sylvie back in her timeline was just really good. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Lacey. We also got some feedback from Heather Wallace over on Facebook. She says, some excellent Loki hair flips in this episode. I counted 5. Mobius's real life in 2022. So that would mean half of all life is still missing in the blip. Is that what he meant by his wife is long gone? Loki broke my heart saying he wants his friends back. The MCU is so much about connection and found families.
that's what brings me back time after time. Thanks so much, Heather. Yep, Heather caught that as well, that Mobius would be in blip time in 2022 as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, good stuff, Heather.
And yeah, it is really good that they're bringing Loki into this universe of the MCU, this grouping. He's finally found other people that he can rely on, other people that he can be around. Hopefully we'll see a bit more of that in the next episode as well. David Mr. Ryder says, "Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm loving it." Or is it put a smile on, everybody come on, put a smile on? That's the jingle for McDonald's in the 90s, I think.
I think so, yeah.
He continues, once again, I look forward to your breakdown and explanation as some of the things have gone way over my head. Interested to see their previous lives before they were taken, though. Yep, I hope we've helped, David Mr. Writer, but I do think there's a lot here that either went nowhere or will go somewhere next week when we look back on the season.
Yeah, that's it.
That's what I'm hoping, anyway. Yeah. That's what I'm hoping. Victor Timely Von Doom says, this episode is very creepy. I could sense elements of the Twilight Zone, Us, and even Black Mirror. Who would figure Casey as an Alcatraz escapee? I was surprised Loki didn't encounter Victor Timely during his true journey into mystery. Very good, Victor. That's Loki's first comic book appearance was in Journey into Mystery. Didn't they name an episode about that last season as well?
Yeah. Good stuff. Thanks so much, Victor.
I can definitely see a bit of Black Mirror in there as well in this episode, and some Twilight Zone going on. Yeah,
Twilighty cool. For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Victor Timely Von Doom. Also, Dr. Bob Phillips says, this turns the way I've been thinking about this show on its head, as it seemed to with Loki. Fantastic episode, allowing each of the actors, well, maybe not Ke Kwan, to play out a different version of themselves, with even Sylvie touched with heartache. We're not watching sci-fi, we're watching a fantasy romance where the main player is falling in love with themselves again, and finally discovering the meaning of friendship. Mm-hmm. Excellent stuff, Dr. Bob. Yes, I totally agree with you here. I think the problem for me was that I'd already, like you say, I had multiple things going on in my mind, so I just went down a dark place on exposition heavy, but I still liked it.
Exactly. Good stuff. Thanks, Dr. Bob. Finally, Joe Herbers says, based on what we see in this episode, what do you think happened to the characters at the end of episode 4? Loki started time slipping again. Maybe he did it subconsciously. Sylvie has her memories, so even though we didn't see it happen, my guess is that she used He Who Remains' temp pad to save only herself, return to her favourite McDonald's timeline. By the way, she didn't seem to act surprised or relieved or happy to see Loki again, which was odd. What did she think happened to him when the loom exploded? Doesn't she care? Maybe the other 3 variants ceased to exist, along with Victor. Loki seems to be travelling to the timelines where they each came from, perhaps near the time when a variant timeline branched that the TVA pruned when they were originally taken to the TVA and memory wiped to become agents. Does that all make sense? I think it does, Joan. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, where I was saying about maybe Loki is picking up these variants, bringing them to the TVA with him and wiping their minds. That's where I thought the story was going, that this is the point that they were taken from the timelines, brought to the TVA, told eventually those versions would be sent back to the point they were taken from, and it turns out they were never sent back. They were working in the TVA from then on. So I wonder if that's part of it. As for Sylvie and her reaction to Loki, I guess she thought Loki had done the exact same thing as she did, escaped.
Yeah.
But she didn't really care, because every time Loki comes to her, he's talking about getting the TVA back, and all she wants is her life back. As we mentioned earlier on in the season, that has been the goal of Sylvie. Get away from all of this crap and go and live her life somewhere. A life that's of her own. And no matter what that is, if it's her working in McDonald's, having a pickup truck, going for a few bourbons in the evening and going and watching some TV, that's it. That's all she wants from her life. And she gets to live it because it's her own. And she feels if she sees Loki again, he's going to drag her on another adventure. And that seems to be her reaction to Loki arriving is, yeah, of course I know you're here. I saw what happened. I got myself out of there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. Yeah. Good stuff, Joe. Thanks very much for the feedback, and thanks everybody for your feedback. As we mentioned, we'd love to hear from you for the finale of Loki Season 2. You can email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can send some voicemails into us through that email address, or on our website at tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can pop on over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries. There'll be a spoiler post up there on Friday for you to put in your thoughts about this episode. Oh, it's been a big old week, the last week. Thanks for joining us for Loki Season 2 podcast, but we've also just finished our coverage of Gen V, the boys' blood-filled spin-off show over on Prime Video, and began our other blood-soaked coverage of Invincible Season 2, also on Prime Video, all this week. And next week, we will continue, of course, Invincible Season 2, and we're going back to the cinema for the MCU with The Marvels.
Excellent stuff, yeah.
Very much looking forward to that, seeing Miss Marvel on screen with Captain Marvel, and with Monica Rambeau and Nick Fury, and of course, Goose, the Flurkin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't
wait to see the ladies in space.
Yeah. It'll be great fun. Looking forward to it.
Really good.
So we will, of course, have that podcast out next week as well. So I'll pop a spoiler post up on the Facebook group as well for that. But if you want to share your thoughts once you've seen it, you can email us to those email addresses as well.
Absolutely. And of course, fellow defenders, please remember you can support us over at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries for a monthly amount, or for a one-off amount over at buymeacoffee.com/TVPI. But of course, feedback is also a great way to support us, as well as subscribing and sharing the podcast with friends, family, and flirkins as well.
Absolutely, and found family.
Yes, and found family as well. Because remember, sharing the podcast is, of course,
sharing
the love.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us. Talk to you again next time.
Yeah, we'll be back for episode 6 next week. But in the meantime, keep watching, keep listening, and of course, keep defending.
Bye.
Bye. Right, spag bowl time.